The monkey orchid. Deep in the cloud forests of Ecuador and Peru, at elevations well over 1,000 meters, a small orchid blooms with a face staring straight back at anyone who leans in close. Dracula simia, its genus name meaning little dragon and its species name meaning monkey, arranges its column, petals, and lip into an uncanny resemblance of two dark eyes, a furry brow, and even a nose. An illusion striking enough that photographs of the flower have repeatedly gone viral online. Despite how deliberate the resemblance looks, botanists are quick to point out that this is not evolved mimicry at all, since monkeys play no role whatsoever in the plant's pollination, and the likeness exists purely because human brains are wired to spot faces in random patterns, a phenomenon called pareidolia. The real pollinators are drawn instead by the flower's genuine fragrance of ripe oranges, released to attract flies rather than any primate. Growing at high, cool, humid altitude and taking anywhere from 3 to 8 years to mature enough to flower, the monkey orchid remains rare even within its native range, and cultivating one successfully demands considerably more patience and precision than most orchids sold commercially. Its long, tail-like sepals trail downward from the bloom, completing an illusion so convincing that visitors to botanical gardens housing the Dracula genus frequently do a double take, certain for a moment that a small animal is genuinely watching them from the canopy above. The Bee Orchid. Across the meadows and chalky grasslands of Europe and the Mediterranean, a very different kind of animal mimicry plays out. One built entirely around deceiving a single specific insect into a mistake. Ophrys apifera produces a velvety brownish-purple central petal, the labellum, patterned with yellow markings that closely mimic the rounded abdomen of a female solitary bee, complete with a texture engineered to feel right the moment a male bee lands on it. That visual trick is only half the deception, since the flower also releases a scent that chemically mimics the female bee's own pheromones, luring hopeful males into attempting to mate with the flower in a process scientists call pseudocopulation. During that failed attempt, pollen sacs attach to the confused insect, which then carries them directly to the next bee orchid it gets tricked by. Unlike the coincidental face of the monkey orchid, this resemblance represents genuine, highly selected evolution refined over countless generations specifically to exploit one insect's mating instincts. Should its specific pollinator bee happen to be absent from an area entirely, the bee orchid keeps a backup plan ready, curling its own pollen structures inward to self-pollinate rather than risk producing no seed at all. In parts of northern Europe where its target bee species has become rare or vanished altogether, entire populations of this orchid now reproduce almost exclusively through that backup method, quietly abandoning the elaborate deception that gave the species its name in the first place. The flying duck orchid, native to the woodlands of eastern and southern Australia, Kalayana major produces a small, reddish-brown flower that hangs upside down from its stem in a shape unmistakably like a duck caught mid-flight, complete with what looks like a tucked head, a curved back, and trailing wings. That resemblance serves a specific evolutionary purpose, since the flower's structure has evolved to mimic a female sawfly closely enough to lure hopeful males in for an attempted mating. Every plant profiled in this episode traces back to real, documented mimicry or coincidence, and Garden's lab keeps hunting down species this visually strange for a new deep dive every few days. For anyone who assumes a flower this convincing has to be fake. The flower's labellum sits on a sensitive hinged strap that snaps shut the instant a landing insect triggers it, briefly trapping the sawfly against the pollen-bearing column before releasing it to fly off toward the next disguised trap. Because this orchid depends on a specific soil fungus found only in its native eucalyptus woodlands, it has never been successfully cultivated commercially, meaning the only way to see one is to find it growing wild in the Australian bush itself. First formally documented in 1803 near what is now the site of the Sydney Opera House, the species later appeared on an official Australian postage stamp, cementing its status as one of the country's most recognizable native orchids despite its small size and narrow, easily overlooked native range. The white egret orchid, Growing in the wetlands and seepage slopes of Japan, Korea, and parts of China, Habenaria radiata produces a small white flower whose fringed, deeply divided lip spreads outward exactly like a snowy egret opening its wings mid-flight. Known in Japanese as sagisu, meaning egret grass, the plant shares its wetland habitat with the very bird it resembles, and the two have become intertwined in Japanese folklore for centuries. One well-known legend tells of a princess who sent her fiancé off to war with an egret orchid bulb as a token of devotion, and after he fell in battle, the delicate white flower is said to have bloomed on the very spot, giving the plant a lasting association with loss and remembrance. Botanically, the flower's elaborate fringed shape is believed to help attract moths and other pollinating insects drawn to its pale color and faint fragrance in the low evening light common to its wetland habitat. Despite its worldwide fame among orchid collectors, the white egret orchid has grown increasingly rare in the wild due to overcollection and habitat destruction, and even experienced growers often find it frustratingly difficult to keep thriving for more than a single season outside its natural bog conditions. A single flower stalk can carry as many as 8 individual blooms, each one unfurling its fringed wings in sequence, turning a single stem into what looks like a small flock of egrets frozen mid-flight above the surrounding grass. The Parrot Flower, restricted to a narrow, remote stretch of forest near the Thai-Myanmar border, Impatiens psittacina produces a flower so convincingly shaped like a small parrot in flight that photographs of it circulated online for years, accused of being digitally faked. Viewed precisely from the side, the flower's fused lateral petals and hooked, spur-tipped lower sepal combine into the unmistakable silhouette of a bird's wing, body, and curved beak, an illusion so complete that early botanists nicknamed it the cockatoo balsam. That specific side-on angle matters enormously, since the parrot-like illusion weakens or disappears entirely when the bloom is viewed from any other direction. The genuine pollinators are bumblebees, which land on the flower to reach its nectar spur, and, in doing so, pick up pollen deposited directly onto their upper thorax as they feed. Thai authorities have banned the export of this species entirely, and because the plant refuses to thrive outside the specific humid, high-elevation rainforest conditions of its native range, it remains essentially impossible to find in cultivation anywhere else in the world. Even a specimen sent to London's Royal Botanic Gardens back in the year 1900 bloomed successfully but never managed to set viable seed, underscoring just how tightly bound this species remains to the exact conditions of its small, isolated native range near the Thai-Myanmar border. The Regal Birdflower, scattered across the sand dunes and arid inland stretches of northern Australia, Crotalaria cunninghamii, produces a greenish flower attached to its stem by what looks exactly like a beak, giving the overall silhouette an unmistakable resemblance to a small hummingbird perched on a branch. The irony is hard to miss, since no hummingbird has ever lived anywhere in Australia, meaning this striking resemblance cannot possibly have evolved as a signal aimed at a bird that was never there to see it in the first place. Instead, the shape traces back to an ordinary structural trait common across the legume family this plant belongs to, a floral arrangement called a papilionaceous form that evolved to suit bee pollinators rather than any bird at all. The bird-like illusion exists purely for human eyes, another case of pareidolia rather than genuine evolved mimicry, no different in mechanism from the coincidental face hiding inside the monkey orchid. Some botanists have noted with a touch of humor that if any species were somehow responsible for shaping this resemblance through selective breeding, it would have to be curious humans themselves rather than any bird, hummingbird, or otherwise. Long before European botanists ever documented the species, Aboriginal communities across its native range already knew the plant well under the name mangar, putting its soft, flexible inner bark to practical use in crafting simple sandals. The Dove Orchid, serving as the national flower of Panama since 1980, Peristeria elata produces a waxy, cup-shaped white bloom that conceals, tucked directly at its center, a strikingly precise miniature dove with wings swept back as though caught mid-landing. That central structure, formed from the flower's column and a pair of surrounding petals, gave the species both its scientific name, from the Greek word for dove, and its widely used common name, the Holy Ghost Orchid, a nod to the bird's traditional symbolism within Christianity. Despite the reverent nickname, the flower's actual fragrance surprises most first-time visitors since rather than anything sweet or ceremonial, it carries a scent commonly compared to beer. Habitat destruction and decades of overcollection by orchid hunters have pushed the species onto Appendix 1 of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, the strictest protection level available, banning all commercial trade in wild collected specimens entirely. A Panamanian conservation organization now runs a dedicated sponsorship program specifically to protect and propagate the country's own national flower, working to keep the species from disappearing entirely from the cloud forests it calls home. Individual plants can produce spikes bearing up to 20 flowers at once, and because each waxy bloom lasts for an unusually long stretch once open, a single flowering stem has become a prized, if increasingly rare, addition to wedding bouquets across Panama. The Spider Orchid. Sprawling across the wet forests of Mexico, Central America, and the Peruvian Andes, Brazia orchids stretch impossibly long, narrow, spidery tepals outward from the center of each bloom, some varieties extending past 50 centimeters from tip to tip. Unlike the sexual deception practiced by the Bee Orchid or the flying duck orchid, this genus employs a completely different survival strategy, deceiving female spider-hunting wasps into perceiving the flower itself as prey rather than a potential mate. The wasp, believing she has located an actual spider to sting and paralyze for her offspring, attacks the flower's labellum, and in the ensuing struggle, pollen packets attach firmly to her head before she eventually gives up and moves on to repeat the same mistake at the next bloom. That constant, gentle motion has earned Brazia the additional nickname Dancing Lady in parts of South America, since the long, delicate tepals sway visibly with even the faintest breeze or passing footstep. Growing as an epiphyte that draws moisture and nutrients directly from the humid air around it rather than from soil, this orchid ranks among the most genuinely alien-looking flowers in cultivation. Convincing enough that a single dropped bloom on the ground has startled more than one unsuspecting visitor into thinking a real spider was underfoot. Its blackish-purple spots scattered across pale, ribbon-like tepals only reinforce the illusion further, mimicking the mottled markings found on the very spiders its wasp pollinators actually hunt.